Hey, if you work in a mid-market company and you do compliance, you do cybersecurity, man, you want to stick around for today's video. I have an expert here in the studio. He's going to share with us some insight into some of the shifts that are happening in compliance and in cyber, because they're very linked. We're going to talk a little bit about geopolitics and threat. I think you'll enjoy it. So particularly those of you who work in that mid-market area doing enterprise IT, enterprise security, stick around. I think you'll enjoy our discussion today. Hi, this is Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber. I want to welcome you to our discussion today. I have my friend Anil Markose here, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for a very cool cybersecurity company called Abacode. He's up here in New York visiting from Florida, and we had a nice breakfast this morning. We're going to talk a little bit about security and compliance. How you doing?
Doing well, Ed.
Hey, you're back, like you're from Long Island.
That's right. I'm a Long Island kid. Grew up in New York, and now living in Florida. So I joke with everyone I'm one of the 50,000 people that moved to Florida in the last 2 years. But it is nice to be back home. Yeah, it's great.
Let's
to be
start
here.
with Abacode.
Yeah.
Real quickly, tell us about the company, and then we can get into some of the technology and themes and so on. But what do you do at Abacode?
Yeah. So I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Abacode. So I'm really focused on kind of our customer experience. What does it feel like to work with Abacode and be a customer of Abacode? But then two, really looking forward into the problem set that our customers are dealing with, and then really trying to drive innovation for our tech stack, drive innovation for our products, and then really tell our story, right? Those are the primary areas that I focus on.
And what is it the company, this is compliance?
Yeah, so we're a managed services company, really focused on the unification of cybersecurity and compliance. And so if you think about your average mid-market company that may be outsourcing security today to an MSSP, if you touch regulated data, meaning personal health information, PII, you do work with the US government, so you have FedRAMP or CMMC requirements. These are all regulated data sets that come through your organization or your products. If you're outsourcing security today, you probably also have a compliance obligation. And so if you don't have a large security organization, large in-house team, what ends up happening is you probably need support in a lot of cases for your audits and your compliance activities. And so this was something that Abacode realized with many of our customers, that they needed help around the compliance activities a number of years ago. And so we provide that as a unified package. And a great example of this right now that is happening in the market is things like third-party risk, for example. Third-party risk is a large security problem because a majority of the ransomware and attacks start in the third-party ecosystem. And so if you have a SOC today, you're very focused on your third parties. However, it's also a critical control in almost every single security framework. And so you have to demonstrate how are you monitoring your third parties, getting control of your third parties. And so it's just a great example of a control that the SOC would care about and the compliance team would care about. And what we do is really instrument that as a unified problem and really try to connect the dots of, if we see activity on the cyber side, it probably translates to a problem on the compliance side as well, and try to create that stitching for our customers.
I bet it's with third parties, it's probably both your customers with their third parties, but your customer also as third party.
That's right, yeah.
Right, that's an interesting
especially
point.
in the mid-market. For many of these organizations, they're also operating as a third party to a larger company, right? And so they get to demonstrate this. And so this is solving the fourth party, fifth party problem for a lot of the enterprises. Is you're doing business with the mid-market, and you're wondering, are they solving third party ecosystem problems for themselves? And so we're really kind of working backwards from the customer's point of view. How do we keep them safe? Number one, which is the core mission. But then two, how do we explain what they're doing from a security standpoint to their auditors, their regulators, and other customers?
A lot of people, when they think compliance, they think it's a static thing.
Yeah.
It's a framework, you do it, you're done, it never changes. We were having breakfast this morning, and you told me that's not the way it works, that this thing is shifting quite a bit. Help the people watching. What are these shifts? What are you guys seeing happening?
Let me tell a story really quick. So prior to coming to Abacode, I was the head of security compliance at AWS. And I was at AWS.
Little teeny company.
Yeah, small little environment. You would think we have it all figured out. And while I was at AWS, I was there during the COVID era.
Yeah.
And what really happened was massive acceleration of regulated workloads moving into the cloud. you're talking large enterprise, companies moving to the cloud on really consequential type workloads moving into the cloud. These are the banking sector, this is the healthcare sector, financial services, as well as government entities moving into the cloud. One of the complexities that I saw was the translation of trust and security obligations. So a great example of this is for a lot of organizations, by just consuming the ISO certification, your PCI report, and the PCI, all you know is that they have a PCI cert.
Right.
You don't even get to see the details. Right. A SOC 1, SOC 2 report. For a lot of customers that consume those reports, they cannot translate that to, is that entity actually doing what they're supposed to be doing with the data or not? And so what ends up happening...
Because there's not enough detail?
There's not enough detail. The testing is not really visible to you as to how much testing was done, what were the samples that were pulled. And so there's a transparency problem in the market right now on how do I, as a customer, trust that when I gave you my data that I have obligations to end customers for, that you're doing all the right things. This was a big problem at AWS. I would say AWS has one of the best security organizations in the world. I mean, they're heads and toes above everybody else. Yeah. The problem is there's not enough of that information translated into all of the reports. So they're not telling a lot of the internal controls externally. I
presume by design.
By design, right? And we don't want to disclose all of that to the adversaries. And so there's internal stuff that's going on that's just not in the reports.
Yeah, however, you do have to help.
However, right? And so what we ended up dealing with was a lot of direct customer audits constantly going on, where you had large enterprises that would practically live at AWS and do audits all year long to understand, does this service provide this control? Does this service provide this control? Does this new feature provide a control? And so what we found was, even though we were issuing, more than 70, 80 reports a year, the customer was not getting what they needed to understand, can I trust the platform well enough? I looked at this and I said, if that's interesting, if that's going on at AWS, think about a health tech platform that is trying to convince you to move your healthcare information to the environment. Think about, a robo-advisory platform that is doing your wealth management and you're asking for all the sensitive information about your income and dependents and all of that coming into the platform. Think about, crypto platforms, payment systems. I looked at this and I said, if AWS is having this translation of trust problem, the mid-market must be having a massive issue. We don't have the army of people that AWS has. And so this is how I landed on Abacode. This is how I found Abacode, trying to solve this problem for our customers at AWS. And then I said, very interesting, Abacode is trying to solve this as a managed service with a platform play to really accelerate the mid-market to moving into disruptive, kind of offerings around regulated data, like health tech, like insure tech, and all of these different areas. So this is what we're trying to solve for. I think the market is really hungry for this right now, which is customers want to know that you are protecting the data, you're doing everything. And then I think the other complexity of this is now, as you have SEC reporting requirements and you have regulators now saying, not only do you have an obligation, but at a later point, if you have a breach, we're going to show up and ask you a bunch of questions on how did this happen. And so there's a defensible kind of side of this as well, to show that 2 years later, you did everything that you said you were going to do, you did everything you were obligated to do, and there was some level of good faith effort applied here to protect the environment. Now, security is not a pure science, right? There's a little bit of judgment, as you know, from your kind of career in security. And so, but what we're finding is the mid-market just doesn't have the talent or the resources or the money in a lot of cases to solve these problems. And I think there's a market opportunity for a lot of service providers like Abacode to solve that problem.
Help me with the balance between, say, security and compliance. They're different. It seems like you guys kind of do both. You go back and forth, I notice a lot, because I think it's you use the word unified when you're describing it. Help me, is the intimacy there by design, like this idea of providing security, but also providing compliance? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we can start anywhere and kind of crawl into the different aspects. So we have customers that just want us to help them with their compliance activities. And we have some customers that just want us to do the traditional MSSP
Stop
business.
These threats.
Right, exactly. Now, where the customer really gets the true value is when you start integrating the two.
Well, that's the way it should be. You know, that's the way it never is. But
Yeah.
I'm glad to see you guys are driving.
And I think, you know, in large organizations like where you were at AT&T, you would find large compliance organizations and large
Absolutely.
security organizations
Very siloed.
and risk organizations that are
Yeah.
trying to stitch this together, right? In the mid-market, what we find is the compliance activity is just outsourced audits that are going on
right.
and issuing of certifications. Security is outsourced to a different MSSP that traditionally does not speak compliance.
Often so.
Right. And so what we're trying to do is really say, for example, if you have, you know, if you are in Cloud Fabric, your applications are in the cloud, if there are regulated data in there, and those containers or those locations are supposed to be encrypted because of HIPAA or other requirements, a great example is the encryption might be an alert that we are looking at in the SOC to say, has anything happened during the DevOps process that would have flipped that encryption off or changed a configuration in the cloud posture management, for example. But then what we're saying is, okay, let's say a configuration was changed. Does that create now an exposure from a compliance standpoint that is reportable? And so this opportunity to stitch that together is what we think is very powerful for customers versus throwing that work onto their plate, which is here's an alert that says something's been, you know, misconfigured, and then you have to now do the work to say, is there an issue here? Do I need to report on this or not? And so we're trying to move a lot of that work to our side of the fence.
You know, we emphasize compliance at the top of the video. Let's talk a little bit about threat. So geopolitics in the world today sort of points to nation states really ramping this stuff up.
Yeah.
And I think in the demographic, like mid-market companies, they always sort of hid behind the idea that, he's coming after us. I don't think that's true anymore. Like, I think automated attacks go after everybody, even targeted attacks.
That's right. That's right.
What's been your experience? Because you guys do provide managed security, and you do have kind of a good eye on what's happening. What's your observation on trends and intensity?
So a couple of data points I'll share. One is I think the use of AI and automation and digitalization by the bad guys is also going on, right? So
for offense
on the adversary side. So I think you have scale over there that maybe traditionally was cost prohibitive, and so when you think about from an attacker's perspective, there was maybe a point of time where they had to be very, you know, conscious of the amount of money and resources being spent to go after a particular target, and you wanted to make sure that that investment was after a sizable of a target to recoup those types of investments. And so I think now the cost of an attack has gone down so to a point where you could increase the aperture of how many organizations are you going to run an attack on, right? So I think there's an economic side of this that creates a wider attack kind of population once you've developed a kind of a technique on the adversary side. And so that's one. So I think mid-sized and smaller companies that historically maybe have not been an attractive target now are just, you know, kind of looped into the attack vector, if you will, because the cost is just so low. Yeah. That's one thing. The second thing is we're seeing in the third-party kind of market especially that if you wanted to go after the enterprise, you don't start by reconning and attacking the enterprise. You start on the low-hanging fruit, which is the smaller companies that they do business with. And so if you said, hey, I wanted to attack a Fortune 50, you're probably not going right at them. You're probably going and saying, let's, you know, kind of monitor and recon on their environment, see who they communicate.
Target the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, who do they communicate with?
Third parties.
Where do checks go? Where do emails go? And then what you're looking for is, you know, to try to attack a third party that's in that ecosystem, compromise their, you know, credentials, assets, and then try to launch phishing from there, which is more likely to be successful, and things like that. And so what you're finding is a lot of larger organizations and are finding that they have to protect that ecosystem just as much as their core network. And so that's, I think, a second aspect of on the geopolitical side is that. The third aspect of this is I've always kind of shared that when you have nation state level activity like we have now around the world, whether that's in the Russian-Ukraine thing, whether that's the Iranian, you know, kind of Middle Eastern activity, what's going on in the South China Sea, when you start seeing large nation-state players start coming into the cyber realm, what starts to happen is new technologies start to get developed, like Stuxnet, when we saw years ago when the worm was developed. Right now, you'll see new technologies that get developed. So new 0 days will get developed at a very rapid pace because they're being used by nation states. The unique thing about nation state level kind of activity increasing is it's a reusable bullet. So in traditional warfare, I fire a bullet, you can't pick up that bullet, throw it back in your gun and shoot it again. In the cyber realm, I launch an attack on you, guess what? That code is now highly reusable by secondary players that don't have the know-how to build that code in the first place.
Metaphor,
right?
I've never used that metaphor. I like that.
So I think this is what we should really be afraid of is, for example, China could develop code for a nation-state level activity, but once that code is released, you're going to find terrorist organizations pick up the code, reuse it, tweak it. You're going to find organized crime pick it up, reuse it. And so you're going to find a more advanced technology getting down marketed really, really fast, which to me says that you're just going to see a lot more adversary activity in the market.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, if people are interested, what do they buy? Buying a service? To buy a platform? Is it integrated? Talk about for people watching, they go, hey, it sounds pretty good. What's the right way to deploy, and what are they getting when they buy?
Yeah, so with us, you're getting a tech-enabled service. Yeah. So we do not run our own proprietary technology from an EDR, network sensor, SIM technology. So we are a certified Microsoft solutions provider for security and modern work. And so we understand the entire Microsoft lingo very well. We're also partners with AT&T, CrowdStrike, Splunk, a lot of the top players, and so what we are doing is really kind of not a rip and replace, but if we come into your environment and you're already running CrowdStrike on the endpoint, you're running whatever SIM you like at the at the top layer, we'll take over that kind of infrastructure and then do the day-to-day 24/7 monitoring.
Hence the managed.
Right, the managed services. Eventually, we'll try to take cost out of your environment, meaning you may have overlapping products, you may have products that are not set up correctly, not tuned correctly, you may have blind spots on instrumentation. So we'll solve all of that for you and try to get you to a managed state of defensibility, right? So that's really our kind of goal. And then on the compliance side, we look at what market are you in? Are you a healthcare company? Are you doing work with the federal government? Are you, taking on transactions from a credit card standpoint? And so we look at the regulatory obligations that you have, and then start working backwards from what are the key controls that are necessary to be evidenced in those frameworks. And then we also look at, what does your threat intelligence look like? And so we're very threat oriented from a perspective. So we're not just going in and saying PCI requires these 5 controls, and so therefore put it in there. We look at it and say, well, what's the threat activity look like? Because we have a SOC as well, and we'll say, based on the threat profile, even though PCI only recommends the following or HIPAA only requires the following, we may ask you to kind of think about a few additional controls here because of the threat profile. And so what we're really, we're left brain, right brain on, of course, we understand the compliance obligations that you have, and we're going to help you pass those audits. But then we also have to be very aware of the threat landscape as well and go, we may need you to step up here on certain things or really focus on other things. And so this is kind of how we build the program, if you will, for the organization. And all of that is a journey, and our goal is to get you to a managed state of compliance and cybersecurity.
That's a very sensible approach.
And now, one of the big things that we've released this year, I think is exciting, is a product called Scout, which is a digital customer experience platform. And so really our ambition there is, if you're a customer of Abacode, you're going to log into Scout, which is our digital platform, and you're going to see your SOC capabilities, you're going to see your compliance capabilities, your third-party risk, all of that in an integrated view. And we think that using AI, there's an opportunity there on the back end to really build a quant model, if you will, to say, is there any new patterns? Is the threat different than it was 30, 60 days ago? Is really from a risk reporting standpoint to help kind of stitch that story together.
Scout.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is first quarter 24. So
we just did a pilot with a large pharma in New Jersey. Went really well. So we are going to go into general availability probably Q2 of this year.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations on all the progress. I guess for people who are interested in next step, the website a good place to get in touch
Yeah,
with you
website is a
guys?
great place. You know, I think that's probably where I'd start because we have so many different services that I think starting there would give you a perspective of the whole company, and then you know we'd be happy to have a conversation and see how we can help.
Nice to have you here in the studio.
Ed, thanks for bringing me back to New York, and it was a real pleasure to kind of hang out with
Come
you.
back and visit at the end of the year. We'll see how you're doing.
Okay, sounds great.
Thanks for your time. And for the rest of you watching, we'll see you next time.